I went to a high school in Philadelphia which was for girls, which emphasized academic achievement. Everyone was very competitive with one another for grades. I did very well in the history classes and asked that my history teacher put me in the accelerated class. She told me she would be happy with my grades to put me in the accelerated level. However, she felt that a white student with lower grades would go further. Therefore, she would not put me in the accelerated course. You know, you really must be paranoid. Those things never happen to me. I don't know anyone who's had those things happen to them. But then, of course, they're free, white, and 21, so they wouldn't have that kind of experience.
I'm incredibly excited to be sitting here in my home study, talking to Howardena Pindell about your work, Howardena, and about the show that we're making together. And I was just wondering right at the beginning, so the first question, question one, before we start the conversation properly, can you tell us a little bit about where you are?
Well, right now I'm at my outside studio as opposed to my home studio. Garth got me Garth Gwennon, my dealer. He's amazing. But anyway, he got me a bigger space in the Bronx. And I really love it. It's, you know, I have a 5-room apartment and I've been there for 34 years. So my home studio is small. I do work there. But that's where I am. I'm in my outside studio. It's located in the Bronx. Very, believe me.
And as my second question, could you describe a little bit your working practice? Do you come to your outside studio every day? Do you have a working rhythm? Has it changed recently? I imagine with COVID it has. Could you tell us a little bit about how you work your studio practice?
Well, in my home studio, I'm there every day and working, unless I'm interrupted by like teaching or whatever. The outside studio, basically, I have 2 assistants who work with a large work here, and I have 2 other assistants that help me with different kind of work. And I come here twice a week or more. Usually it's twice a week. And my assistants, I have assistants in the home studio as well. My working rhythm is choppy due to teaching online. I had a large loft in New York City for 10 years. I've been in lofts for 18 years, but I had a very big loft. It was like 2,300 square feet. It was very, very industrial.
Wow.
And because I lived and worked there, it was kind of intense. Even though, you know, I could be there 24 hours a day working. And of course, on the days that I was working at a museum, which was about a half an hour subway trip away, I could work at night. And the job that I have, where I'm still teaching, I've been there 42 years. And for years, I commuted there 2 hours each way by train. And non-teaching days, I would work intensely. When I was young, I could lift heavy paintings. I'm 78 now, so I need assistance. Even during COVID, I have assistants, but they were required to wear a mask, be vaccinated, and be tested for COVID. The working rhythm depends on events of the day. Recently, interviews required prep time. So prep time is usually studio time to time. And I need to make notes due to like memory loss from a head injury, old age, and some medicine.
That's a very full answer. Thank you very much. I'd love to move on now and start asking you about the works that we've selected together for our exhibition. And so question 3, can I start our conversation by asking about the earliest works in the exhibition, the abstract acrylic works from 1970 to 1972. I believe you made them by forcing paint. When you read about these works, you made them by forcing paint through a stencil. Can you describe for us the process of making them?
Okay, the process, I punched out with a cheap hole puncher, 1 by 1, file folders, which I cut in strips, and I glued the strips together after they were punched. I sprayed acrylic through the templates that I made, and I would take like plastic and wrap it around the template so that you wouldn't get like a hard edge. In the acrylic, I put water tension breaker, and I had a small spray can. You could buy them then. I don't think they have them on the market now. And what you would do, it had a little thing that came out, and you screwed on like an 8-ounce jar, plastic jar, and in it, I would put acrylic, thin enough that I could spray it. But I made big paint. I don't know how I did it, because I was just doing a little bit and a little bit and a little bit anyway.
Yeah, so yes, but I wanted to ask you about the abstraction of them. I mean, it's a very particular process you described. What attracted you to abstraction? What made you, did you think, right, I want to make abstract painting? Did you have a particular inspiration?
Well, it's odd. I was attracted to the circle. I was born in Philadelphia, which is an intensely figurative painting city. Plus, I went to Boston University for my BFA, and they were intensely figurative. In fact, when I got into Yale, the School of Art and Architecture in '65, my teachers from Boston U stopped talking to me because they knew I would no longer be a figurative painter. The change was extremely gradual due to my having a day job and loss of natural light. I was influenced by Joseph Albert's color course, which was taught at Yale by his assistant, or his protege, I really should say, Cy Silman. What triggered my use of the circle, there were 2 things. There was a graduate student in my class, her name was Nancy Murata. She was white, but her husband was a Japanese. And she started working with the circle, and it was like a catalyst of some kind. I mean, I was like, oh my God, I'm drawn to this. And then I started to remember years later, you know, because I started using the circle, that I had been frightened by a circle as a child. My father and I were in Kentucky. My mother's mother lived in Southern Ohio. And so we went to visit. And when my mother was with her family, her mother and the sisters, my father and I drove into Northern Kentucky, and we went to a root beer stand. My father loved root beer. And we were given chilled mugs, just like everybody else, except at the bottom of it was a giant red circle that was painted. And that was to indicate that these were segregated utensils, so that non-whites were given any kind of utensil with like a circle under it, a red circle. And when I asked my father what it was, why, you know, he told me, and I was kind of shocked, and it kind of stayed there and brewed. And then in later years, I became, as an artist, stuck on the use of the circle and the ellipse. I turned to abstraction, I believe, through using the ellipse and the circle.
So actually not so much of an abstract. In a way, it was quite a representational moment, the circle, for you.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, I'm still using circles. Anyway, and I was also drawn to the work of Larry Poons, who was using ellipses and circles. Yeah.
Did you start off making these acrylic works so large? They're very large paintings. What drew you to make them so large?
I think it had to do with the influence of Yale.
Okay.
Because they kind of encourage you to do large work, but they didn't say do large work. It was just the work being done around you. You saw what was happening. And then some of the teachers that were there, like Al Held, who was kind of obnoxious. I stayed away from him, but he did large work. And I know some of the, Yale at the time was only for men, and graduate students, women could be graduate students, but not undergraduate. So there was a very kind of male atmosphere. And I remember some of the men in my class were kind of cuddling up to Al Held. And like the large abstract painting was like, that was the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found I was strong enough to do them. And I just started working larger. But the thing is, it's complicated because when I came to New York, I didn't have a loft. You know, I lived in apartments, so I worked on smaller work, some works on paper, and then they all started to just congeal. They started when I moved to Westbeth Artist Housing, and they gave me an outside studio with the walls that could, you know, accommodate large work. And so that's when I really started doing large work. And that would be in probably like 70, 71.
I mean, I love that maybe there's an ambition involved in the scale of them, but they seem very confident. They're very confident work. And it drew me to wonder, did success come quickly? Did you show these works straight away? Were you able to show them?
No.
So I have an image now of you in a tiny studio filled with enormous works, painting very large and not knowing what to do with them.
Well, the success did not come quickly. Again, thanks to Garth Gwennon Gallery. These works are being resurrected. I'm doing new versions. Basically, in the 60s, 70s, and so forth, white male artists were shown. Women and artists of color were avoided. And if you criticized a white male artist, that was considered censorship. But it wasn't considered censorship if people of color or white women were ignored. I was a member of a women's cooperative called AIR. I was one of the founders and named the gallery. I was the only person of color. The spray works were shown for the first time there in AIR in the early 1970s.
Moving on to look at the large white paintings from the paintings that we're showing are from 1974 to 75. Again, very large, but they have an intimacy about them, I think. Partly perhaps to do with the complexity of the surfaces. And I wanted to start by asking you about the collage elements in these works. So you've made paintings by forcing paint through a hole punched stencil. What made you start adding to the painting surface? What made you start to work with collage?
Combination of things. I was making I numbered dots and put them on graph paper. They were drawings basically. And then I started dribbling paper into the wet paint. And then I started using color markers, and they would bleed up through the paint. And I like that a lot. And I also took the templates and started extruding paint through the holes. I'm working on a series now that's the grid series, and that is a combination of letting the dots that have the dye on them or whatever it is bleeding up, plus extruding paint. So, you know, it's just like it was a playful gesture, you know. I mean, I saw myself having fun in a way and not quite looking at the judge or the critic behind me. I was also used to, one should not be used to it, but I was always used to having kind of critical judgments against the work at that point. The work was changing, mm-hmm. but it was also within the African-American community. I think you touch upon that later.
Yeah.
There was a very negative feeling towards any of the Black artists that did abstract work, because the feeling was the work should be about the Black experience. So basically, a group of us were shunned, like Bill Williams and myself, probably Al Loving and so forth. That's changed. That's all changed. It's not true anymore. But some of the people from that era, for example, the head of the Studio Museum in Harlem, who rejected all of us and told us to go downtown, literally, and quote, show with the white boys, he still is carrying anger towards us, even though our work has changed. You know, I both abstraction and issue related. Yeah.
So it's a nice image you're painting of setting that aside maybe and letting yourself be inspired by the work, as you say, playful collage, adding collage elements because one bit of material suggests another. So the paint bleeds through the work, so you think, oh, I'll do that again. It's a nice idea. I'm struck listening to you talk and looking at the paintings. Moving on to, you don't seem to throw anything away. So when you look at using the collages, you use the chads on the painting, a variety of materials that you seem to have roundabout. Is that true? Were you just reaching for things you had? Are you a hoarder, Howardena?
I would say in the beginning, but now it's basically I buy sheets of paper and I have different kind of markers, and then some of my assistants will punch things out. We all punch things out. In fact, I punched so much I screwed up my arm for a while. You know, it's just too much. It was like kind of carpal tunnel of the shoulder. So I kind of spread that around and told them, don't, you know, punch for a while, take a rest, punch for a while, take a rest. Anyhow, so, you know, it's just right now, this new grid series is very playful. And what I wanted to say also, the bleeding up came from an experience I had at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, where there was I don't even know what you call it. It wasn't a frieze. It was from Akhenaten's period, I think 18th dynasty, Egypt. And there was a wall, kind of slightly high relief, and the figures on it, basically heads, it had faded after thousands of years. And I liked that effect. So that actually influenced me when I was seeing, you know, how the chads worked with color on them and they would bleed up.
That's really interesting. It's really nice. And you used, having decided to use all these things that you have to hand or you don't throw away, did you use at that point, even in the 70s, the grid as an organizing principle?
Yes.
To keep the material under control, really?
Yes, I used the grid. There's one thing though I wanted to mention, that some of the paintings had glitter. The paintings were sewed together. Sometimes I added powder and perfume. The perfume doesn't last, and you don't know what kind of perfume people like or don't like. I also, as a child, learned to sew. But when I worked at the museum, there were openings that were formal and you were required to wear a gown. I couldn't afford to wear a gown. My pay was so low. So I started making my own clothes. And so that meant I was around thread and whatever and sewing fabric. In terms of the organizing principle and my father, the grid, is that what you were asking? My father was a mathematician.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he got his degree in mathematics. And he would take gridded notebooks and write numbers. And so I would see him take out these numbers, take out these books rather, and just write numbers, which were basically odometer numbers. I mean, in the old days, they had something where the numbers would change on your car so you knew how many miles you had gone. So I was used to seeing that. That's why I started numbering paper, dots. I also, as a kind of mocking gesture about the grid, I made a soft portable grid that was about 12 feet by 12 feet. It was canvas filled with foam and held together by grommets. At the time, like the New York art world, the grid was sort of the essential visual expression. I'm not sure if I thought about it at the time, in terms of the being, pro or anti-grid, but I just enjoyed making them. And I wish I had the strength now that I had then.
And then finally, in this section, I'm interested in the concept of time in these paintings, these collage paintings, large collage paintings from the 70s. They unfold very slowly. They need a lot of time to look at. Was that deliberate? Did you want to slow the viewer down?
Well, I like the fact that it does require, even if you get close to them or far away, it does require time to really read them. And it took time to make them. So I don't mind that issue of time, that it requires a more kind of intimate contact with the painting and kind of reading it rather than, like reading a Motherwell. It's like, boom, black and white. But no, I'm glad it takes time to read them. It certainly took time to do them.
Yeah, that's a nice idea, the notion of reading a painting. Which brings me on to my question 5, which is, I was struck recently by a photograph of a detail of a work that you're working on right now that was sent to me by Garth Greenan. It's a detail of where you have stitched together parts of the canvas, and you've talked to us already about sewing, which is lovely, but the stitching of the canvas reminded me of your works on paper, the marks that you make that are like tallies. You make these groups of 5 and you cross them, and I just suddenly thought the stitches looked like that. And I wanted to ask you to talk about the works on paper.
Well, the works on paper, they're different sort of genre. I mean, they're the works on paper I did with dots numbered and glued to a graph paper. They're works on paper when you get into like the 90s, maybe or 80s, where I start making literally 3-dimensional collage with using thread and all, just having things on edge. Like I would put down jade glue and take Play-Doh and put it on either side, and it would hold it vertically, and then I could move the Play-Doh, and then I had an element that was like straight up and down. So it's been through a lot. I mean, the whole evolution of the drawings. But as I had mentioned before, my father was a mathematician, and I saw him writing, recording distances by writing numbers. He used statistics also. I remember he was also learning about intelligence tests. Anyhow, I enjoyed the numbering, and I started numbering the dots. So in a way, there was a kind of tallying, because I started off sequentially, and then the numbers got so far beyond my ability I just started numbering anything. It didn't matter whether it added up or not, or was sequential. I've also made, I think Garth has it somewhere, storage, a cassette tape where I read numbers. And the gallery has that somewhere. I gave it to them. They have it somewhere. And one of my favorite pieces is a long, like scroll-like effect, using the tiny dots in the graph paper, but stretching it out over maybe 4 sheets. That I think is one of the ones I like the best.
You seem to have this need to make lists and tallies. Does that chime with you, the need to make lists, keep records, keep things in order?
Now at 78, I have to keep a list of, what am I doing today? Because I so easily forget. I just like making lists. I don't know why. I don't remember. Maybe my mother made lists, but I need to now at 78. Because I don't want to forget something important.
Well, I think throughout your work, you've made lists and made sure that we don't forget important things. And I did want to link this idea in question 6. I wanted to talk to you about the question, your work with data, the lists you kept, the questions you asked of museums in the 1980s and the 1990s about the representation of artists of color in museum exhibitions and commercial gallery representation. Your work that you called Art World Racism, it seems to me it's a very important collection of data and bringing to light of data. So you've taken a need to make lists or an enjoyment of making lists to ask some really hard questions.
I pulled on the memory of my father using statistics, and Art in America, their August issue, their summer issue, listed, and they would send out a questionnaire and the galleries would answer. It wasn't about making up who was in the gallery. The galleries then listed where they were, location, and what artists they represented. Very few artists, if any artists of color, Black, Latino, Native American, Asian, whatever, were either exhibited or even represented. the white galleries discouraged each other from representing non-whites. This was in the 1960s and 70s, also into the 80s. If non-whites, if non-whites were represented, they often would appear only in a closet. I'm serious. And then the dealer would, if someone came in asking for them, they would pull the piece out, but they would never list them on the list of artists that they represented. Yeah, there were all kinds of dirty tricks. So I presented this report. I kind of made, here we go, tallies. I started making a list of galleries and how many people of color they represented, museums, how many art shows that I included what people of color. And the full report, many, many years later, I think it might have been a show, it was pre-COVID, the Brooklyn Museum exhibition. It was called We Wanted a Revolution. And they reprinted the whole thing, which was really nice because I thought it was gone forever. Yeah.
It's important work. I mean, it's questions that I think we as museums and galleries need to ask ourselves now, why we're not doing better. We'll come to that later, but thank you for that work. I think it was important work to do.
Thank
and from there, I want to talk, question 7, I want to talk about Free White in 21.
Okay.
An extraordinary video, which seems to emerge in your work fully formed, kind of out of nowhere. I mean, obviously, we've been talking about the work you've been doing, the investigative work you've been doing, and maybe that gives us a hint. But it seems not to be related to the abstract work that preceded it. And I suppose my first question in this section is, where did it come from in your work or in your life? Is it linked? Is it linked to the museum research, or does it inspire the museum research? Could you tell which comes first?
Well, I think the research was there in the back of my brain, but it was my reaction to the white women's movement and their lack of concern for women of color, because they wanted us to be online with them picketing. In fact, I was in my office. I was at the Museum of Modern Art. I was in my office, and some of the white women artists called me up and said, come down and picket with us. I said, I can't do that. You have husbands who have jobs. If I lose my job, I'm the only one. And so they were kind of annoyed at me that I did that. But if there were any demonstrations by women of color, they would never help. They would never appear. And in fact, I remember there was a consciousness raising group I was in with some very well-known women artists in the community, white women artists, and I was the only Black person. And when I would bring up issues of racism, they would shut me down and say, oh, that's just about politics. We're not interested. So the tape was really about experiences I had in general, with the women's movement, but it's not specifically linked to the museum research project. Okay. It was more about my experience with the women's movement.
And born out of anger, I imagine. And you appear in the work? Had you done live performance work before making the video?
No, this is the first time.
Wow.
First time I bought a blonde wig at a place called Woolworths, which closed many years ago. I bought nurses' stockings. The eyeglasses were for real. They were from when I was a child, the sunglasses. I had stage makeup because I played both parts. And it just came to me as an idea. I was kind of, it was like, it has to be done. And then I ran into a woman, I think her name was Marina Leno. And she said, I'll bring a camera crew and we'll come up. This was when I was in the loft on 7th Avenue near Macy's. And she brought a 2-woman crew, both white women. She was Latino. And we got about an hour's worth of tape. And I just performed, I just talked about my experiences. One experience with my mother, but just in general talked about my experiences. And with each experience, I would change my clothing. My mother had sent me a box of clothing because if I said to her, oh, Mama, I'm, at the museum and, the Rockefeller family, whatever, and she would ship me off clothing because I couldn't afford to buy it. Anyhow, so I also got some colorful background paper, photo drop paper. And so each image has a different kind of feel to it in terms of color. And then I just talk. I just talk about my experiences. And a number of people, like when it first came out, Anna Mendieta was a member of AIR, and she put together the show. It was called The Dialectics of Isolation. And I showed the tape for the first time. And on top of the monitor, there was a metronome. That's been, sometimes the tape is shown with it or without it, but usually what the museums do is they put a microphone or something that ticks like a metronome. Mm-hmm. And for me, the metronome represents the heartbeat and the passing of time. And also, one of the reasons I used it at the gallery, and it was shown at AIR Gallery, was I wanted people to be able to hear what I was saying. So the ticking would keep them focused on the video rather than ambient noise in the gallery. So it was, that was that concern too.
And I guess the metronome is a tally, isn't it? It marks time.
Tally, marks time, right. Right.
And what was the reception to the video there in AR Gallery when you first showed it?
I don't actually know what the reception was. I just didn't even ask. At the time, I was no longer a member. I know when it was shown at Franklin Furnace, soon after that, people were really angry about it. They were very incensed. And that's, mainly the artists who went to see it, not, collectors or anybody like that. So, I was just used to getting a kind of negative response to it. It was Maria Leno did send it into a jury show, and they turned it down because they said it was too divisive. I mean, there are a lot of strange things that happened with that tape. Now it's considered a kind of an iconic piece. But what I experienced when I had my traveling show that went around the country from 91 to 95, one of the art schools in Ohio, the arts are very, very reluctant to have any kind of diversity. It was shown in the gallery along with the rest of the show, and someone stole it out of the show. So it was taken out. The director of the gallery was threatened, and he was a photographer, and they stole his photography equipment. And I was getting heckling calls from students at home in New York from Ohio. When it was shown in Atlanta, Georgia, same traveling show, some of the whites requested the show be closed down because they said it was hostile to whites.
Sorry, this is in the 1990s, Howardena.
Yes.
Goodness me. Goodness me.
Yeah, it was hostile to whites, and that there were two paintings, Columbus, and then the video that they wanted, like the show gone. And then it turned out sometime after that or during that, in Cobbs County, I think, which is a sort of like a division of Atlanta, there was a theater piece which was about homosexuality. And so what they did was they pulled the funding from the arts and gave it to the police.
You couldn't make it up, could you really? But
no, can't make it up.
So I have an image of you making this work born of anger, really, frustration with the white women who wanted you to demonstrate with them.
I remember there was one instance I had where I showed the tape at the University of Vermont. I think it was in Burlington. And a young white woman, probably in her 20s, in the audience stood up and said, "Well, do you feel better now?" I mean, I got a lot of sarcasm from white women. What
did you answer her?
I remained silent. I don't know how to answer something like that, So, I mean, I've run into incredible hostility with it. And one really bizarre one was when it was shown in New Jersey. There was a Black guard who guarded the exhibition, and he was upset because he felt it put down Black women who wore blonde wigs. That's very weird. But anyway, it happened.
I mean, it's interesting you recounting those stories because it's a very complex little video, isn't it? It's dynamite, basically. It doesn't surprise me. It's had this range of complex.
Absolutely. Oh God, yes.
So question 8, around the time you made Free White in 21, you changed your life, moving out of museums because you'd been working at the Museum of Modern Art, moving out of museums and into teaching. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I had, when I was at Yale, worked in the Garvin collection, the British collection at Yale's art gallery. It wasn't art gallery, I think it was separate. It now has its own separate building. I worked at the Museum of Modern Art for 12 years. I started as an exhibition assistant and left as an associate curator. And I think what really motivated me was there was an exhibition. I have someone else who's asking me about this. I have to dig in my memory. But there was an exhibition in March of 1979. And it was an exhibition of charcoal drawings that were abstract by a young guy who was a punk. His name was David, what was his last name? I think it was David Newman, whatever. And he just used his first name. And it was at the Artist Space, which is, a publicly funded art space. And the name of the show was called End Drawings. You know the word.
I know the word.
And there was like an uproar about it. And both whites and blacks went to the Artist Space, and we showed up and they called the police and shut the doors. So we couldn't get in. And then we went back and they let us in, but then one of their white supporters, a white artist woman, said to the group, "Who do you think you are coming down here and telling us what to do? This is a white neighborhood." So here you have this publicly funded gallery who had been given expansion arts money from the New York City or state, either city or state arts council. And they were having a show of Scottish art. They were supposed to go into communities of color and, and have them part of their programming, but they used the money to bring in European artists. Anyhow, I was speechless. That's all I can say. But anyway, when I was at MoMA, I helped form the union called Pasta MoMA. And I also got tired of a lot of power-hungry people. I just got really tired of it. There were some individuals who were lovely to me, so I can't say the museum was outright hostile to me. There were individuals who really were wonderful to me. But there were a lot of really power-hungry people. And I was aware of racism within the system, the comment that they look at work of quality, which has quality. And it seemed like work of quality was done by whites and work that was not of quality was done by non-whites. I mean, it would just boil down to that.
And this, obviously, you discovered this, the experience of gathering data and finding out more about racism in museums. In your Art World Racism documentation, you talk about this hiding behind the notion of quality. It's not a racial quota, it's just, we just go by quality. And as you say, it just so happens that quality is found in a particular sector and not in another. And did that gathering of data, did that make you want to leave the museum world? Did you just think it
made me mad. It didn't exactly make me want to leave. But I mean, if I left, I'd be in a similar, for example, when I left, I did continue to curate shows, but at the gallery at my job at Stony Brook. And there were other ways, how can I explain it? This is under like number B, data and statistics. Universities have their own difficulties being diverse. The administrations at the universities tend to be white and male. And over time, they were letting in white females. And there was a waiver you could get with affirmative action. You could not hire a person of color, but you could hire a white woman. And so over time, the whole system, I'm in a state school, they found that there were like 500 cases or some outrageous amount of white women brought in order to get rid of or not have Black people there. So they tried to change that. I mean, in my department, there are 2 women of color, 2 women, but the department is more female. I think we have 1 Asian female, and we have 1 female who's, I think she's from India, But we have more female teachers than we have male. And the university is also mainly science. So we're kind of off in a corner somewhere.
You're still teaching. You said right at the beginning of this conversation that part of your rhythm is that you teach online. What do you get from it? You must get something from it, or you wouldn't be doing it.
Well, I just enjoy seeing the students, rather not teachers, the students work, and see how they change, and how when you say something, how they take it in, how they interpret it. And I learn a lot from them. Like before COVID, I remember I was teaching still life because I'm a figurative painter, or used to be. I use figurative sometimes, just intermixing it with text and stuff. She tried to paint a still life, and there were so many people she couldn't get too close to it. So she went up close and started taking photos, and she did the most extraordinary painting, because her camera saw far more than she could. So that's something I learned. I mean, it's not something I use because I'm not figurative in a way, but it helped other students, so I find it can be very helpful. And the students can be very helpful to each other, which is nice. It's nice to see.
So the activism in art world racism and in Free White and 21 comes to the fore in your work after 1980. Can I ask you to talk about the three major paintings from 1980 to 2000 that we have in our exhibition? Can I ask you to talk a little bit about Separate but Equal Genocide?
Separate but Equal Genocide is a memorial, actually, to my cousin. He died when he was 35 of AIDS, and he was in a strange position of looking white to whites, and to some whites he looked black. To Black people he looked white, maybe Latino, whatever. And so when he would go in for help, if they thought he was white, he would get one kind of treatment. If they thought he was Black, they would get another. So that's why I have the two flags. And the names on the flags are people, and in some cases, young people who have died of AIDS, either through blood transfusions, whatever. And what I did was I called hospitals around New York, in the boroughs as well, and got the first names of children and teenagers who died of AIDS. And at the time, I already knew of 13 adults who had passed away of AIDS, and they were all within the art world. And the flag, I didn't paint the flag like an American flag. I mean, the structure is. And along the edge of it, there's like a red stripe, and that represents the research that a Dr. Strecker did. Dr. Strecker's brother was murdered, and he feels it's because of the research. And what he found was that the AIDS virus was not from an African monkey, but from, he called it bovine visna, which I think is sheep and cattle. And he felt that it was a bioweapon. And so I put his formulas on the edge. So that's what that painting's about the dual treatment of my cousin. He eventually died when he was 35.
So bearing witness, really tallying lists of, bearing witness to injustice.
Yeah.
And what about Tarot Hanged Man? Can you talk to us a little bit about
Tarot is just a fluke, I used to read tarot and it scared me. So I don't have anything to do with it anymore. And that tarot card means something, but I wasn't thinking of race at all. I was just using a tarot image, but I have no idea what it means. But no, that was just a kind of a, it was just sort of something I did. But
that's fascinating. So collage really coming to the fore there, the material suggesting itself. That's interesting. But the last one of these paintings I want to talk to you about, to ask you to talk about very specifically, is Diallo. Now that does have a specific.
Well, with Diallo, I mean, this is something that has been a problem for the African American community and for communities of color, is police violence. And so that is what that is about. The fact that someone can take out their keys, can take out a cell phone, whatever, and you're shot dead. And I remember seeing, this was a case of a shooter, I think in a high school. He was an older person. And there was this whole group of whites, I don't know whether they were National Guard, whatever, went after him. No one could kill him. In other words, they were not shooting to kill, they were shooting to maim. So in the Black community, this is one of the terrible things, is that when the police go after you, even if it's a traffic violation, they might kill you. You know, so that's what Diallo was about. And that's like, Diallo was like long before we had George Floyd and all the other Breonna Taylor, before we had a whole lot of other murders of Black people by the police. It's, you know, the attempt to change this is in the air, but we now have this polarization. So some people are pulling left and some people are pulling right.
Absolutely. So separate but equal genocide, AIDS, and Diallo, extremely forceful subjects. Yet they still use, to my mind, they still use abstraction as their primary language. You've not really, you don't move away from abstraction, really.
No, I don't. No. Mm-mm.
And I wanted to ask you, we've talked a little bit about it earlier, but I wonder if you have anything more to say really about who isn't allowed to use abstract visual language. The idea that you said before, I don't know if you've got more you could say, the idea that Black artists are supposed to make figurative work about the Black experience.
No, it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter. Both abstraction and figuration are accepted by the Black community. But in the 1960s, no. During the civil rights movement, no.
And do you think your work had something to do with that? Do you think your activism and your insistence on making abstract work?
Frankly, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know, because within the Black community, then there was this whole issue of it being very masculine. So I don't know. I don't know. I haven't been thanked, but I don't need to be thanked. I just did it. No, I just did it.
I'm sure it did make a difference. But just finally, in this section, I wanted to ask you a little bit, Diallo, about separate but equal genocide and Diallo, but the use of words and lettering in your work. At what point do the lists and tallies become names, the use of lettering?
Well, the use of lettering started with my use of issue-related. I had been in a car accident as a passenger and received a bad concussion, and I could have died. And so it took, I still suffer from the memory thing. I felt I wanted to express my opinion about things, and I wanted it to be not ambiguous. So that's when I would say in the 1980s, the accident was 79. And in the 1980s, it was on the way to school, and my department chair was driving, and it wasn't his fault because there was a woman who was on back medication who drove into oncoming traffic. And we were slowing down at the light. Thank God we were slowing down, or I'd be dead as a doornail. But anyway, I wanted to make kind of a clear case. If I had an issue about something, I would put it in text as well as image. And some of the titles, like one is How Dare You Question, another, Who Do You Think You Are, One of Us, like what happened in Artist Space. And I just started, putting these texts in work so that people could read them and it's not ambiguous. Because one of the few things, I was accused of is, being divisive, being shrill, and usually these are white male critics. I had one white male critic in terms of my abstraction, because sometimes they use glitter, saying, it was in an art magazine that's since gone, it's called, they're out of business. It was called Art Examiner. And one of the critics saw my work in Chicago at the Renaissance Society. And his comment was, my work is just a light show and he wanted to have sex under my paintings. So, this stuff is like, I know. So you would get attacked. The women would attack me and they'd say, some of the art historians or art critics would say, how did you get that job at the Modern? Basically, you're not an art historian. I get this hostile stuff over everything. So
this desire not to be ambiguous, to say, right, this is what I want to say.
What I want to say, yeah.
Fantastic. Yep. So this brings us on to the most recent work, Columbus and Rope Fire Water, the most recent work in our exhibition. Could you talk a little bit about them? They're extremely hard subjects, a very direct forceful work. Columbus looks at enslavement, the torture and mutilation of indigenous people, and also, I mean, it looks at everything, also art wash, the laundering of dirty money through culture. Can you talk a little bit about what you were trying to say unambiguously with that painting?
Yes, well, Columbus would cut off indigenous hands. Columbus would feed children, babies to their dogs. He trained them to eat human flesh. He would grill people, and I mean, he was really horrendous. And Queen Isabella told him be nice to indigenous people, and they brought him back to Spain in chains. And they released him because he brought back with him so much gold, so much wealth, that they decided he was innocent. So, but anyway, so the three most wealthy American families who profited from plundering other countries, such as Africa, funded large institutions which often bear their names. I'm not going to give you their names, but they're pretty obvious. And there have been recent protests by artists pre-COVID, and then I think maybe around this time or maybe last year, whatever, but mainly pre-COVID, where the artists were protesting against museum board members and who they were. And the three things that they were able to find is some trustees were connected to Jeffrey Epstein, the young people, sex trafficker. One of them, and I think that was with the Whitney, but I'm not sure, manufactured weapons for war. And then another one whose name was in both the Met, I think, and the Guggenheim, the family business was the pharmaceutical making opioids, which led to high addiction rates.
So yeah. It's like you've got a very big focus with that painting. You go from the atrocities perpetrated through the colonial voyaging right through to atrocities perpetrated by rich families now attempting to.
Yes. Yeah, the Columbus painting deals with that.
And how about Rope Fire Water? Can you tell us the story of making it? I understand that you've had it in mind to make for a long time.
Well, in the early 1970s, when I was a member of AIR, the White Women's Cooperative, I proposed a performance piece about lynching to the women in the group, and they all white, they all turned it down. So it was kind of in my head. It was an experience I had as a child. I don't know how old I was, maybe 12 or 13, 11, whatever. I was visiting a family friend, and it was one of those overnight play dates, and her mother was cooking meat, and I was just in the living room flipping through magazines, and there was an image in Life magazine of a Black man lying over a log being burned alive, and you could see him burn. It's in the tape. It's hard. You may want to tell people that it's tough material. Warn them because it's pretty horrible. And
certainly will.
Yeah, do warn them. And he's burning from the inside out. And he's surrounded by white men, all smiling like they have accomplished something wonderful. And it made me so sick with the smell that I stopped eating meat. So that image has stayed with me, and it is in the film. And that was the performance piece would have had that image projected. And then I was going to hire someone to stand as a Klan member, on a some sort of platform, whatever. But no, I think the final resolution was much better because I was able to make a film that it has legs, that is, it'll travel. Performance only has a limited life. And I was able to include both slavery and the civil rights movement. So I think it's about a 20-minute videotape film, I don't know what people call it. But I do cover, slavery, lynching, the civil rights movement.
And what were the grounds they gave you to turn it down in the 70s? What did they just say it was too strong material? Or?
They didn't say anything. They just said no. And I think it had to do, it was a very disturbing image for them. Probably they were totally shocked. And they may, just like in the white women's consciousness raising group, they did not want to deal with it. It was considered like political and not their problem. So more or less not their problem. They don't want to show it here. So But I think it's in its current form, it's the best possible form. Because I'm talking and you're seeing archival footage. You're seeing the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama, where the fire department, dressed in their fire department regalia, are hosing down children and teenagers, and the water is so terrible. It's taking off the skin of the children. It's such high-powered water, and you don't even hear about that. You have to look around to find that kind of information. So it's hard to watch. I saw it at the Shed once or twice, and it was like really hard for me to see it, even though I knew everything that was in it, but it was a shock still.
There's moments, isn't there, in the video where it's just black, as though the camera can't look or the artist can't look?
Yeah, there's silences. The metronome is there again, but there's silences, visual silences, yeah.
It's a lovely idea. I mean, for work such as yours, sorry, I'm very much going off script, but work such as yours, which is unflinching, which looks at stuff. One of the things you've done throughout your career is to look at stuff. At certain points, you don't look there.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And how was it to exhibit it in New York in 2020 in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the context of the rising Black Lives Matter movement? It must have been very particular. As you say, it has legs. It will be with us. Thank you so much. You make it everybody's problem, which is wonderful. But how was it to exhibit it there?
Well, what was interesting, George Floyd changed the world. I mean, initially, he created a kind of positive polarization in a way where people who were on the fence finally found this is it. This is offensive. And that young teenage girl who filmed it on her camera, she saved the world too, because she recorded his death. And the thing that I find, the look in the guy's face, in the policeman's face, it's like he's blank. And the thing that I noticed, I'm sure other people may have or haven't, or just don't want to think about it, he had his pocket, he had his hands in his pocket down near his genitals, and he had his knee on his neck. And George Floyd was calling for his mother. He was calling for his mother. It was interesting to see the trial of the police officer, and that he did get time for murder, to hear his girlfriend talk about him and what a wonderful man he was. And what I found interesting was that his girlfriend was white. And she talked about, again, just how, and she kept crying through the whole thing. It mobilized the Black community, it mobilized some of the white community, something that you did not see on television, but I have friends who are Native American, apparently, or First Nation, I like that better. Apparently, a group of First Nation people performed a ceremony where he died. And my friend within the Native American community, the tape was being shared. And she sent me a copy. And it showed, it was a video. It showed people of color who were indigenous dancing around the spot and, playing drums and whatever. So it brought a lot of people up front instead of, hiding and disagreeing, but this made them really angry. I mean, I remember seeing the image of an elderly white man protesting, and the cops just pushed him down to the ground, and he hurt his head. He was in the hospital. So the white policemen, if you chose the other side, that meant they did not have to respect you. So I don't know. It's a tough tape. It's a tough tape. But what's interesting is during my show at the Shed, I think it's about 5,000 people went to see the show. It was up for about, I think we'll have here 5.5 months, even though it was during COVID. It might have been a large group, but I think it was around 5,000. The Shed is huge. It's a very big space, and they laid it out beautifully so that the tape had a very large space for the film to be shown in. And there were, places to sit, separated by space. Mm-hmm. It was really, I don't know, the timing was perfect, but it's a shame about what happened. And now I know you have about hope for change. Well, I'm a bit of a pessimist. I'm very concerned about the kind of polarization because the right-wing forces are trying to control, they're trying to roll back voting rights. Gerrymandering, that is, what you do is take zoning, and so you zone it, so even if you're a Black voter, your vote doesn't count for much. And so the Voting Rights Act, it's like they want to be in control of the government to prevent people of color from voting and for women, prevent them from having abortions. And it's pretty scary. I'm not optimistic because these right-wing forces, in some cases, they are governors or mayors or whatever, and they can take the Electoral College. We have got to get rid of the Electoral College, and they can change the vote. This is especially in Georgia and Texas. So that, I know Colorado has a Democratic governor, so she's trying to make everything kosher. But some of these governors are making it so you can even be harassed online while you try to vote, or even when you go inside to vote, you can be harassed. I mean, just like with the abortion rights, they're making it so it's a crime if you take a woman to have an abortion. Like the Uber driver who drives her across state lines could be arrested. It's all very scary. It's all very scary. And like even now, as clear as it is, the vaccine helps. There is a whole group of people who do not want to be vaccinated. And some of them are hospitalized and die. And they don't believe they have COVID when they do. So, it's just needless. Under our last president, it was needless death and suffering because he didn't want to acknowledge it or had some stupid ideas about what, was it put light on your body or whatever.
Drink bleach, was it not? Drink disinfectant or something?
Bleach, yeah. Some people did that and were in the hospital. It's very scary.
So you don't see much, you're not an optimist where politics are concerned. Are you at all, and can art help? Is there hope for change in what you're doing? You're obviously you're still active and you're still an activist.
Yeah, I'm still an activist, but right now it's almost like I'm taking a rest and I'm working mainly on abstract work. I just, like one of the things I'm doing that I really enjoy is Deux Données, the paper making workshop. I've been working with them for a couple of months and I enjoy that a lot. Those are all abstract pieces and layering them, with something called abaca and a very thin abaca. And so you can look down into the piece or into the pieces. And the inspiration for that was I lived in Japan with a grant, I think on a grant in the 1980s. I think it was like 81, 82, something like that. And I saw something, it was called the Hekinokyo, which was a scroll at a place near Hiroshima, Miyajimaguchi, I think it was the island. And it was, I don't know what century it was from, but it was so beautiful. And you could look down into the water. I don't know how they did it, what was being portrayed as water and what was under the depths. And that really, really hit me in a very, very positive way. And so the paper pieces I'm working on now involve layering. So it looks like you're looking down through levels. I think that was the most influence that I got from living in Japan. I was there for about 7 months.
Do you feel then that's interesting because obviously you've pushed your work very much to the forefront of politics and wrote Firewater and being made before it being exhibited, obviously, but being exhibited in this extraordinary moment of Black Lives Matter. You have this very, 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 the front line of politics. and yet you're still so fascinated in the material. You can distract yourself. You come out of that and you're back into the paper and the material reality of making.
I enjoy that. Yeah, I enjoy that. I enjoy that. And it's working on a smaller scale than I'm used to. It's a scale that I see as drawings, a drawing kind of scale. But I enjoy it, and the people are wonderful to work with there. So Garth had arranged for me to be there, and I'm glad he did. Yeah.
So really at base, what we're saying, when asking about what you're doing, you're a maker. You're a looker and a maker.
Looker and a maker. I'm getting old, though.
Well, the work isn't getting old, Howardena. The work certainly isn't getting old. And I think I want to thank you very much for giving us your time just now. But
absolutely,
it's so exciting for us that your work, this exhibition, will be seen in Edinburgh and in Cambridge and in Bristol, 3 really important university towns in the UK. And I think the students there will respond to this work, and other audiences in all these 3 towns will respond to the material imagination of this work and the politics of this work. And I really want to end with thanking you for entrusting it to us. It's a big deal to send this extraordinary work around the world.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Making time for us.
I really appreciate it.
You seem in very good health, Howardena. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. You too, Howardena. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.